Commercial leasing is an amazing way to launch a career in commercial real estate. Today, we're going to talk about best practices to be an amazing tenant representative. And with us today is Roxy Klein. Roxy Klein focuses on leasing both tenant and landlord rep. But as a landlord rep, she's dealing with tenant reps all the time. And so we were having a conversation. We're thinking, what is it that just sometimes we just wish that new tenant reps really understood about commercial real estate so that they could better represent themselves, their clients, and work more effectively with us when we're representing landlords. So, Roxy, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm excited about this topic.
Oh, yeah. If someone just takes a couple of the little nuggets from this and applies it to their career, they're going to accelerate themselves and set themselves apart from the crowd, think. So before we really launch into this, Roxy, tell me just a smidge about yourself.
Sure. So I focus on commercial real estate, specifically retail. So shopping center leases is my bread and butter. And as you mentioned, I do both landlord rep and tenant rep, and I do enjoy doing both. Today, we are going to discuss tenant rep specifically, and also the things that agents should be cognizant of when taking tenant rep assignments, and then once they take those tenant rep assignments, what they need to know in order to be professional and get the job done.
All right. So you are down in Southern California, like what, the Inland Empire area? Because we got people that are going to watch this all over the world, right?
Yes. So I live in Chino Hills, which is in the Inland Empire. And as far as my territory is concerned, my focus is within 30 minutes of my house for listings. And in regarding tenant rep assignments, I am very careful on the tenant rep assignments I take. And we'll go into a little bit more detail on that in a bit, as I'd like to advise everybody, don't jump into anything. That's a mistake that I made early on in my career before I knew what I was doing, where I would just take any opportunity. I would be working on something, the phone would ring, someone would say, "Oh, I'm looking for this space," and then the next thing I knew, I was looking for them for that space, and I should not have been doing that. So my goal is today is to educate as many people as possible to not make those same mistakes.
Awesome. And by the way, the Inland Empire, Chino Hills, it's in the greater Los Angeles area. It's a little bit south of Los Angeles. Dealing with realtors specifically is one of my things that I do because I train a lot of residential realtors on how to get into commercial real estate. And some of them are members of my team, some of them I'm mentoring, and others, they just call me up for advice because they've got several thousand people across multiple social media platforms that follow me. One of the biggest things that I find with realtors, just like you said, is taking assignments that they shouldn't take. What is it that you look at specifically when you're first talking to someone to help you filter out the people that you shouldn't be taking? What are some of the questions that you like to ask people when they call you on the phone and say, "Hey, I'm looking for a place to put my karate studio or
Mhm.
my CBD store or whatever it is." What is it that you're looking for? What are the questions you ask to qualify your prospects?
Sure. So there's a lot, but I'll try to limit it as much as possible. I always like to tell people to put yourself in a landlord's shoes. If you were a landlord, would you lease to this person? And then start to think about how viable it is to do a deal with this person. Is this person serious? Does this person have experience? Is it their first rodeo or not? If it is their first rodeo, I'm not saying that that's bad, but I'm just saying there's a lot more involved when it's someone's first time leasing a space. Are they financially capable? Is their build out going to come out of a loan, or is it going to come out of savings? If it is going to come out of a loan, have they already done that legwork? Have they been pre-qualified for the loan? And in regards to their use, it's common knowledge that landlords don't like smoke shops. I just think it's important to look at the big picture. Why are you representing this person? There's more reasons to represent a tenant than just that one paycheck. And think about, what their brand might do to your brand as well.
That's an amazing point that you bring up is your reputation, because the commercial real estate community, the agent community is really small, it's tight knit, and we tend to know people within our market. And so if you are representing someone and you don't do a good job, it's really easy to develop a bad reputation. And one of the worst things you can do is try to reform a bad reputation and create a good one when you've made it bad from the beginning. When I talk to prospects, I like to tell them, hey, look, what I want to do is I want us to make a presentation to sell you to the landlord. So what is it that we need to do to sell you to the landlord? And even before we get there, I have to sell you to the landlord's representative so that they know that you're a serious candidate. So one of the things that I tell people is I need to know that you are financially qualified, and I have to vet you financially that you will pass the landlord's scrutiny to be able to rent the space, because I'm not going to go to a commercial broker, someone maybe I'm meeting for the first time, and damage my reputation by saying, oh, I haven't vetted my client, so I really don't know. And I don't want to waste the time of the landlord's rep or my client's time if they're not qualified.
I appreciate that. I wish everybody was like that.
Yeah. And so let's talk for just a moment. What is it when you are the leasing agent that you're going to want to see with an LOI? I mean, what are the documentations that you're going to want to see, or at least know that they're available for immediate inspection if an LOI looks good?
Sure. So, in order to get to a showing, which is, before the LOI stage, let's just go ahead and talk about that. Just
Sure.
basic items that I will want to know from a tenant rep broker, just to make sure that it even makes sense to show them the space. So one, I'll ask if their client is familiar with the area. If their client, has driven by the area, that's very important to me. I'll ask if they have discussed the lease rent, the base rent, and the triple net, the whole bottle of wax with their client to make sure we're in the same ballpark. Because if our rent is $5,000 a month and their client has a budget of $2,000 a month, there's really no point of continuing this conversation. I'll want as much details regarding their experience, their background, their website, if they have a Yelp, Google, any review sites, that's helpful. And then once we get past that and we have the initial showing, if their client is going to put in an offer, we have standard applications that I'll ask for them to fill out. And in the application, it will also ask for about 2 months of bank statements and has a signature in order for us to run credit. And those are just the basics. My clients have different levels of scrutiny. Some of my landlord clients want to see tax returns. Some of them don't care about seeing tax returns. So, some of them want to see profit and loss statements from existing businesses. So there's different levels that we go beyond. But just initially, I want to know, do they have good credit? And do they have money in the bank? And do they know what they're doing? And does their use make sense for the property? So, often I'll have people call me up and say, hey, can I put a chicken restaurant here? And it's like, well, there already is a chicken restaurant there. However, in some situations, that could be a different ownership and it might not be in the CC&R, so it might be okay. But if that tenant rep broker says, hey, Roxy, I see there's a chicken restaurant there, does that mean we can't do one? That makes me feel comfortable, like, hey, they looked at the property, they know what they're doing. And then I'll say, you know what, actually, there is no exclusive because it's separate ownership and there was nothing recorded in the CC&R. So yes, we could do one. We would just want to make sure that, your client is aware that chicken restaurant is there. But other than that, there's nothing excluding us or prohibiting us from doing that. So just, those are the basic things to give me the warm and fuzzies with an agent. If somebody calls me up and I just ask basic questions, what does your client do? And they can't answer that question, that's just a big red flag for me.
And you mentioned something a little bit ago about that the agent understands the financial structure. And doesn't it just frost your cookies when you get a call from an agent and you have to, they ask you to explain to them what triple nets are?
Yes, that is probably one of my biggest pet peeve, because I feel if you don't know what triple nets are, how can you explain what triple nets are to your client? And you're doing your client a disservice by practicing in a field where you're not knowledgeable.
Well, and a lot of the people that I deal with, they're residential real estate agents. When they're a realtor, they're a member of the National Association of Realtors, and there's a code of ethics that they're bound by. And the code of ethics specifically says that you are not supposed to practice real estate in an area that you are not qualified by education and experience. And so if you are a realtor listening to this, partner with someone, get a mentor, get someone who knows what they're doing to work with you. And that's going to go a long ways with people like Roxy. Wouldn't you agree that if someone calls you up and they say, hey, I'm a realtor and I'm learning the ropes, but I have a mentor. So my mentor is experienced and they're helping me. So if I say something that maybe seems a little bit naive, don't worry about it because I've got a guy that's backing me up, and just let me know so that I know what questions I should ask my mentor.
For sure, yes. And I'm all about helping people. I just like it when people help themselves as well, like you're saying.
Exactly. All right. So one of the things about real estate is understanding the basics. And there are multiple different types of leases. With retail, I'm assuming that you probably are seeing mainly triple net leases, right?
Correct. Yes, definitely. Almost all shopping center leases are triple net leases. Every now and then there might be a modified gross one in there, but for the most part, everything is on a triple net basis.
If you're launching into commercial real estate, before you go out and you start talking to people, understand the basics, understand what the types of leases are, understand how they work, and better yet, learn to explain it to someone else. I found in my own life that if I want to master something, I need to teach it to someone else. So find someone who is willing to be your foil, so to speak, okay? And explain to them the things that you need to talk to your clients about so that you're knowledgeable. Do you like that strategy?
Yes, yes, definitely. So in addition to just learning basic lease structures and types of leases, I also recommend understanding guarantees, because pretty much these days no landlord that's going to do, or very few landlords that would consider even doing a lease without a guarantee. So that is a conversation, to go back to your question earlier about, vetting. That is on my initial list with any tenant that I might represent, because if they tell me, hey, Roxy, there's no chance I'm going to do a personal guarantee, it's not worth my time. Now, as their broker, I'm going to do my best to try to limit their guarantee. Maybe we can, if it's a 5-year lease, try to limit it to the first year or second year, and then maybe a rolling on top of that if the landlord doesn't agree to that. But if they just say there's absolutely no chance I will do a guarantee, again, that's not a person that you want to spend time representing.
Okay. Now, this is a big topic now, is buyer broker agreements. When you are representing a prospective tenant, do you enter into a buyer broker agreement with them?
So that's a really good question. And at this moment, I don't. I know some firms do and some firms don't. For the most part, the majority of the commercial real estate tenant rep brokers out there, it is more of a handshake deal, but it is a serious handshake deal, where again, you just don't go into it lightly. There's meetings, there's, discussions of how both party behaves. That's another thing that's on my list in regards to the initial meeting with a potential tenant is I will flat out tell them, if you see a sign and you want information on that sign, on that property, you text or email me and I will follow up right away. But as soon as that tenant starts calling out on their own, you lose all of your viability whatsoever. And you also have to ask them, questions in a, not so forceful manner, but just to make sure that they know you're serious, is in regards to loyalty. I had a former Subway I was leasing about a year or so ago, and within a 1 to 2 week span, I had 3 separate showings, all with tenant realtors, and they were all representing the same client. And then they had no idea that person was running around with all of those other people. So, you can try to get somebody to sign a form, committing them to you. It is a lot more difficult. But I'm just a real big believer in just setting myself up for success by letting them know these are the parameters. If we want to work together, this is how we are going to work together.
Yeah, from my practice, I specifically require buyer broker agreements because it does establish loyalty and it does establish the parameters. And I specifically let my clients know that, yes, if you see a sign, don't talk to the other broker. Don't talk to the listing broker. Get a hold of me and let me do my job because that's what you're paying me for. When
Well,
you're the,
just for clarify, yeah. So I don't specifically do buyer rep. So right now we're just talking about tenant rep agreements. So do you have tenant sign agreements?
oh, well, it's the same agreement. So I just always call it the buyer rep agreement when I'm doing tenant representation.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for clarifying that because some people don't catch that it's a single agreement for both representing a tenant or a purchaser of real estate. Now, when you're the listing broker and you have someone call you up and they're asking you a bunch of questions, and then all of a sudden you get a call from a tenant rep broker and they're asking you to that they're saying that they represent this person, how does that make you feel? And how does that color your relationship?
I don't like it. I like clarity, and that does not provide me with clarity at all. That's why I really appreciate this call today, because I feel that if more people do a better job vetting their assignments and having that understanding relationship with the client, then hopefully I'll stop to get calls like that.
Yeah. And even when I have a tenant rep agreement, notice I didn't say buyer broker this time. When I have a tenant rep agreement in place, I still find people, they get excited and they'll make those phone calls. And then I have to call the listing agent and say, hey, I've got a signed tenant rep agreement in place. I apologize that my client reached out to you. I've instructed them not to do so. So let's move past that. Let's move forward towards working towards a deal. Business plans, demonstrating to a landlord that you're viable, especially for people who are new at something. How important is a business plan to you, and how important is it to most of your clients?
So, as far as something fancy, like these days with Chat GPT, somebody can put together a business plan in a couple minutes. So, having something like that, it's nice, but I think what's more important is just demonstrating behind that. I think a resume that shows, like, for example, someone says, hey, I want to open up a restaurant, but they've never owned a restaurant before, but they have been a manager at similar restaurants for the past 10 years. That's useful information. And then again, it all comes down to money. What is their net worth? It's sad to say things like that, but it's a matter of fact. Landlords want to know, is the tenant experienced, and do they have enough money to do what they say they're going to do?
And when they don't personally have enough money, I find that with my clients, I'm always working with the lenders, especially small business administration lenders, and working with them to make sure that the lender feels like they're viable before I ever go out and start looking at real estate.
For sure. Yep, definitely.
Site criteria, a lot of people, they just really don't understand what it is that they're looking for. And so when you're dealing with someone, like you mentioned the chicken restaurant before, I mean, you can have, say, a Kentucky Fried Chicken, and then you could have someone who wants to open a wok that's a chicken oriented wok restaurant or Asian chicken thing. And those are pretty compatible with each other. But, a lot of people, they just don't think about, well, how am I going to be competitive in that market? And so, as a landlord rep, how much time do you spend dealing with people who aren't doing the research that they should on demographics and competition and things like that?
So, typically I'll find that if a tenant is just not a good candidate, then we won't even get to demographics or any of the other details. It pretty much goes hand in hand. And I am able to, if they get past that, if their agent has them get past that first initial, will Roxy provide a showing? And I don't mean to seem so like totalitarian, but I've been through so many showings where I haven't done my homework ahead of time, and I know the results when I don't do my homework ahead of time. So I do my homework ahead of time. I meet them for the showing. Then I'll continue to ask more questions in regards to getting the information that I'm going to need in order to present them to the landlord, because it goes so much farther than just the application and just all the whole package. The landlord will say, "Hey, Roxy, what can you share? Tell me some additional information that I'm not reading on the paper." And so that's what I do at the showings, is I get that information to provide my clients.
The whole timing issue, the time of a deal, especially dealing with retail, and even more importantly, when you're dealing with something like a restaurant, can be really important. So let's just walk through how long it takes to do a deal, how long it takes to get, say, building permits, which can vary greatly by area. And when you're structuring a deal, at what time do people pay rent, and how about concessions for, okay, if we need to do a build out, it's going to take 9 months to do a build out on a 10-year lease, what kind of concessions are available in your market?
So for someone just getting started, I think it's important for them to realize that there are no two landlords that are the same. So with that being said, though, I find that in today's market, there's really two main types of landlords. There are the institutional landlords that have money for TI, but they are going to be extremely critical in regards to reviewing tenants' finances and reviewing tenants' experiences. Then there's other landlords who are also going to be critical, but a lot of them will just not give any money for TI whatsoever. So, it just really, really depends. It depends on the landlord. There's some landlords that I have right now that just say, "Hey, Roxy, there's no TIs whatsoever." Others will say, "Hey, maybe $10, $15 per square foot." So it just really depends on the landlord. And I recommend you ask the listing broker in regards to if there's any TI or not. Some they may tell you the truth, they may not, but at least you'll have a starting point in regards to figuring out how you want to structure your client's offer.
And when you're structuring the offer, looking for free rent during the build out period, that's something that I've negotiated in the past. In your experience in your market where you are today, how friendly are landlords to offering some free rent during the build out period?
So most landlords are definitely more open to free rent versus actual money TIs, or landlords work, actually doing work for their tenants build outs. It varies. I would say like on a 5-year deal, average free rents anywhere from 2 to 4 months. which is basically, a wide range. But again, it really depends. To answer your question earlier regarding permits, as you said, every municipality is different. And that's been, one common theme just almost everywhere, is just the amount of time it takes for tenants to be able to get their permits and then do their build out. Construction costs are more expensive these days. So I just recommend that you educate your clients and say, hey, just so you know, if you take this deal, the landlord's offering you, let's just say 3 months of free rent, there is a chance that you might have to pay rent before you actually open for business. So be prepared for that, because the last thing you want is someone to sign a lease and not understand what they're signing. And so I just have to give my little spiel with attorneys. Every single time you do a lease, you need to let your clients know that you highly recommend that they have a commercial real estate attorney review the lease. I always, let them know I can help you through the LOI process. I can work to negotiate you the best deal, but I am not an attorney. And when we get to that lease stage, the lease could be 20 pages, the lease could be 100 pages, but as a real estate agent or broker, you are not legally allowed to offer them legal advice, and you're not experienced to offer them legal advice. So I can't drive that home enough. I've talked to so many tenants that have said, oh, I just signed this lease. And then I'll say to them, well, did you have an attorney review their lease? And they just say, oh, my realtor reviewed it for me. And like, that hurts me so much. So please don't do that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we were talking, and just let's back up for a second here to dealing with planning departments and building departments and stuff. And one of the things that I specifically talk to my clients about is, before we even go look at something, if let's say you're doing a build out and you're going to have to do tenant improvements, and you're working with a specific city. All right, go down to the building department, talk to them, and get an understanding. How long does it take to get building permits? What's the process like? How much does it cost? How often do you get permits that you have to have them revised? And what does the revision process look like? I know in some building departments, it's like you submit something, they tell you, they get to the first mistake, and then they send it back. And so you correct that mistake thinking that you're ready to go. And then they keep scanning through. Now they find another mistake. They kick it back. And it's like, hold it just a second. Can you please review the entire thing and give me a list of all the things I need to correct? Because sometimes it'll take 2 weeks or a month for them to even get back to you with approvals or with their questions. And so this can really be a huge financial strain when you're dealing as a tenant and that you have 4 months of free rent to get your things done. And now your location is being delayed in opening because the building department took 4 months just to get your plans approved. And you haven't even gotten your contractors on site.
Definitely. And I also recommend doing homework in regards to if there's any special permits needed for your client's use. So, every site is going to have a different zoning, and, you'll need to go to the planner and say, can I do this use at this address? But before you even get to that point, get a general understanding. Obviously, if you're working with a school, a CUP is traditionally needed. A drive-through, a CUP is traditionally needed. So understand the basics.
So in the CUP being conditional use permit.
Correct.
Not a cup.
Exactly. So get an understanding. And this goes back to my original point is, understand your client's use. And in order to understand your client's use, zoning is a big factor in that.
Well, and a certificate of occupancy, or what we call a CO, is really important. I had a realtor contact me about a month ago, and they're like, Chris, my client just went in and the planning department said that they're not allowed to operate their karate school in this location, and they just finished all their TIs. What do I do? I'm like, what? You're trying to ask about getting insurance after you crashed and burned the car. That's not going to work. I mean, these are things that you have to do in advance. And as an agent, I can ask some basic questions, but I always tell my client, I cannot be responsible for interacting with the building department, with the planning department, with any of the governmental municipality people. You have to go in and you have to vet that they are going to be working with you and that they're going to approve what you want to do. And you need to give detailed information to the government officials on what you're planning to do so that you will be able to get your certificate of occupancy in the end, because it's not the landlord's responsibility. It's not your agent's responsibility. It's not your attorney's responsibility. It's your responsibility, Mr. Client or Mrs. Client, to get those approvals or know that you can get those approvals before you sign your lease.
Yes, and get it in writing as well.
Oh, absolutely. How many times have we dealt with government officials and they say something and then they go to the counter later and it's like, oh, well, that was just the intern you were talking to. They didn't know what they were talking about. So, I always recommend when you talk to people in government, get an email from them that says, this is what we talked about. This is what we were willing to approve. If they don't send it to you, then you send them what you understand it to be and make sure you get a response so you've got something you can go back to. And even when you have something in writing, I've seen government officials backtrack and change their mind.
Yes, it's the interesting world.
It is a very interesting world. Okay, last thing I want to talk about. And Roxy, this has been a great conversation. And I've been remiss. I haven't introduced myself. My name is Chris Vogt. I am your professional connector. I am a commercial real estate mentor and a team leader. In the past, I've had commercial real estate teams across multiple states from coast to coast, working with agents, especially residential agents, launching into commercial real estate and helping them be successful. The big question here is a huge difference between residential real estate and commercial real estate, and this could be changing with the lawsuits and stuff that are going on with compensation, is the multiple listing service that realtors are used to with residential. It lists the buyer broker or the tenant rep fees. And so how important is it, if you're a tenant rep, to understand what you're going to get paid by the landlord or the listing agent?
Well, it's very important. So my recommendation is in your initial LOI, put in there what you're asking for your fee to be. And be prepared, because often the listing broker will scratch that out and they'll say per separate agreement. And then you'll go back to them and say, okay, well, what is this separate agreement? And sometimes you really have to push to find out what is the agreement. So get it in writing, what they say you are going to be paid, and make sure that gets in the LOI.
Personally, when I'm working with realtors, or even when I'm working with my own clients, when I'm representing them as a tenant, I always get in writing before I even show a property is, what is the buyer broker fee? What is the tenant rep fee that's available? And so getting that up front so that there's no misunderstanding, because in my tenant rep agreements, my buyer broker agreements, it lists a fee structure and it says, this fee structure is this is what you're going to pay if the landlord or the seller doesn't pay the commission. This is what you're agreeing to pay for me and my professional services up front. And whatever the landlord pays towards that reduces your fee. Understanding commissions is really important. Understanding that you have to get something in writing from the listing agent is critical to your success in commercial real estate.
Can I add one thing in regards to the commissions?
Absolutely.
I think it's really important to understand what is common in regards to when you will get paid. So it is pretty common in the industry to understand that the first half will be paid after the lease is signed, of course, and then after all contingencies have been waived. then the second half is pretty common to be paid when the tenant opens for business. I've had a lot of realtors expect the entire commission at once, and they don't understand that structure. And it makes me think, okay, this must be their first deal, which is fine if it's your first deal. But if you know that ahead of time and you're not asking for the entire thing to be paid when you know that the likelihood of that happening is zero, it just makes you seem more professional. So when you ask the listing broker specifically what the commission is, ask when will first half be paid and ask when will second half be paid.
Absolutely. And this is something that I see questions about all the time. Chris, my LOI said this, but they're not honoring it. It's like, well, an LOI, a letter of intent, we didn't define that earlier because we were expecting that the LOI is not a binding agreement. And so you have to have a written agreement. If you're in the state of California, you're a realtor, there are commission agreements that are published by the California Association of Realtors. Become familiar with them and know how to use them and when to use them. You don't have anything to say about that. I'm shocked.
But I'm trying to contain myself. So, okay, there's different sides of the fence in regards to commercial real estate. So there's people that I assume are watching this channel that use all the CAR forms and are realtors, and there's people like myself that don't use any of those forms and are not realtors. So, often I'll do a deal representing the landlord and a realtor will come in and they'll have like all of these giant forms for us to sign. And, my managing broker says, I'm not signing those, go away, So just be prepared that if you're representing a tenant and the landlord's broker is not a realtor, we're not going to sign any of your forms.
There you go. And so in California, where you are, there are AIR forms and there's also custom forms. So what forms or what agreements do you use for commission agreements?
So for all of our listing agreements, my managing broker has a proprietary listing agreement. So we use that for all listing agreements. For our leases, if our landlord client wants to use AIR leases, we'll use AIR leases, but they could very well have their own lease as well, and no AIR leases used.
Okay, but how about commission agreements between
Yeah, so
realtors?
So regarding commission agreements, that's something that we really don't get into. So it's pretty much like I said, well, in our commission agreement, it says that we will split half. So pretty much that covers a broker because it says, or a tenant rep broker, because it says in our commission that if there's a tenant rep broker, we will share 50% with that tenant rep broker.
Okay, great. All right. This has been a great conversation. And I really appreciate how open you are because a lot of commercial agents, they're just really like, hey, look, go play in your own sandbox. This is my sandbox. I'm not talking to you. And you're great. I love your attitude. I love your humility. I love your willingness to share. So thank you very much for joining us today.
Of course. Well, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Any last words? I mean, you've dropped some great nuggets of wisdom today.
My last words are if you're not sure of what you're doing, just stop and don't do it and ask and ask for advice because it is just going to come back in the end if you don't do your homework. So do your homework, be prepared. As Chris said, get a mentor that aligns with your goals. Find out, what you want to do, in commercial real estate. There are a lot of people out there that do all gamuts of commercial real estate. I when I started off, in addition to retail, I did office and industrial, and I just found out that I really liked retail and I wanted to focus on it. And there's just so much to learn and understand in retail. That's why I'm focusing. So I do recommend the focused approach as opposed to, trying to do all product types. But find out what you like and go learn how to do it.
Yeah, and definitely get a mentor. If you're looking for a mentor, my cell phone number is right there on the screen. Can't hide it. Publish to the world. Let me know. You can reach out to me by text 24/7 and I'll reach back to you when it's appropriate. This has been a fabulous conversation. Thank you very much, Roxy. And we look forward to seeing you on our next video. And don't forget, if you haven't clicked like yet, click that like button. If you haven't yet subscribed to our channel, subscribe right now. It doesn't cost you a thing, but it helps us publish more videos, those likes. And if you really like this video, put a little comment down below and let us know, what did you like best about this conversation? Or if we didn't cover something, what would you like to see in future videos? So this has been Chris Vogt along with Roxy Klein. I'm your professional connector and commercial real estate mentor. Have a fabulous day.